History has a habit of shrinking what it does not prioritize. Entire civilizations can be reduced to a paragraph, dynasties compressed into a sentence, intellectual movements summarized in a footnote. But long before modern global hierarchies shaped which stories were amplified and which were softened, the African continent was home to complex states, intellectual centers, trade networks, and political systems that operated with sophistication equal to any medieval power across Europe or Asia. To understand that fully, you have to begin with geography, because geography determines possibility. Africa is not a single landscape. It is a mosaic of river valleys, savannas, forests, deserts, and coastlines. The Sahara, often imagined as a barrier, was once a conduit. Caravans crossed it in calculated cycles, guided by knowledge of stars and seasonal winds. The Niger river system functioned as an artery, sustaining cities through agriculture, transport, and communication. The Nile linked Nubia and Egypt into a shared political and spiritual corridor. In the Nile Valley, the kingdom of Kush emerged south of Egypt. Centered first at Napata and later at Meru, Kush was not an imitation of Egypt. It was a regional power with its own trajectory. Its rulers absorbed Egyptian religious forms but adapted them to local political authority. When Kushite kings advanced north and established the 25th dynasty in Egypt, they did not erase Egyptian identity. They restored temples, reinforced priesthoods, and projected themselves as preservers of sacred order. Their legitimacy rested on continuity, not rupture. This pattern of adaptation rather than destruction appears repeatedly across African polities. Power often integrated rather than obliterated. Further west, centuries later, the Mali Empire rose from the foundations laid by earlier states, such as Ghana. Ghana had already mastered the trans-Saharan gold and salt trade, regulating the flow of commodities that were essential to survival and currency. Salt preserved food in tropical climates. Gold fueled Mediterranean economies. Control of that exchange meant leverage far beyond regional boundaries. When Sundiata Keita unified Mandinka territories in the 13th century, he did more than win battles. He structured governance. Provinces were administered by appointed officials. Tribute systems were codified. Trade was taxed but protected. Agricultural production was stabilized to ensure population. Growth could support expansion. Mali's strength was not random wealth. It was infrastructure. By the time Mansa Musa ascended the throne in 1312, Mali was already integrated into global exchange systems. Musa inherited functioning trade routes, diplomatic awareness, and a literate elite connected to Islamic scholarship. What he added was visibility. His pilgrimage to Mecca in 1320 was both religious and geopolitical. The caravan reportedly included thousands of attendants, and immense quantities of gold. When he passed through Cairo and distributed gold generously, the local economy experienced inflation that lingered for years. Whether numbers were exaggerated by chroniclers is less important than the broader reality. Mali's wealth entered international consciousness. European cartographers began depicting Musa on maps holding a golden orb. Knowledge of West African gold-influenced Mediterranean trade strategies. Yetov etim. As European maritime expansion shifted economic gravity toward Atlantic routes. Earlier, trans-Saharan networks diminished in global attention. Narratives recalibrated. But within Mali, scholarship flourished. Timbuktu became a center of learning. The Sanka madrasa attracted scholars who debated theology, astronomy, mathematics, and law. Manuscripts preserved. In private, family libraries reveal intellectual traditions that contradict simplistic portrayals of sub-Saharan Africa as primarily oral and non-literate. Oral tradition existed powerfully, but it existed alongside written scholarship. This coexistence of oral and written systems allowed resilience. When political centers shifted, knowledge did not vanish entirely. It dispersed into households, into memory, into private archives. In southern Africa, Great Zimbabwe emerged between the 11th and 15th centuries as a major urban center controlling trade. Between the interior and the Indian Ocean coast, its stone enclosures, constructed without mortar, demonstrate advanced architectural planning. Artifacts found there, including Chinese porcelain and Persian glass, confirm participation in long-distance trade networks. Great Zimbabwe was not isolated. It was integrated. In the Horn of Africa, Axum had already established itself centuries earlier as a trading empire with access to the Red Sea. It minted coins, maintained diplomatic contact with Byzantium, and developed monumental architecture. Its obelisks still stand as evidence of engineering capability. Across Central Africa, iron smelting traditions reveal independent technological innovation. Furnace designs optimized airflow and temperature control. These were not accidental breakthroughs. They were the result of iterative experimentation passed down through generations. If you widen the lens further, patterns emerge. Resource control leads to political centralization. Trade integration leads to urban growth. Intellectual exchange follows commerce. Religion adapts to governance. Succession disputes test stability. Peripheral territories strain imperial cause. These dynamics are not uniquely European or Asian, they are human. So, why does popular imagination often struggle to visualize medieval Africa as systemically complex? Partly because later global power structures influenced which narratives became default. During colonial expansion, emphasizing African fragmentation supported political justification for intervention, highlighting Centralized pre-colonial states complicated that rationale. Yet, the evidence remains layered across disciplines: archaeology, linguistics, manuscript preservation,
oral genealogies, architecture,
trade, records from North Africa and the Middle East, the Songhai Empire, which followed Mali's prominence, further expanded administrative sophistication. Under rulers like Askia Muhammad, civil service structures were formalized. Provincial governors oversaw taxation and justice. Islamic scholarship continued to thrive. Timbuktu remained a key intellectual node. Decline came not from sudden disappearance, but from cumulative strain, succession conflicts, shifting trade routes, Moroccan military intervention in the late 16th century. But even after political fragmentation, cultural memory persisted. Trade adapted rather than collapsed completely. Influence shifted shape. When the Atlantic slave trade intensified, demographic and economic disruption altered trajectories profoundly. Societies redirected resources toward defense or survival. External demand for human labor distorted internal political incentives. The long-term consequences were immense, but interruption is not origin. Before disruption, there were centuries of consolidation, negotiation, and intellectual production. And today, as manuscripts are digitized and archaeological methods improve, nuance returns to the narrative. The idea that Africa was historically disconnected cannot withstand sustained scrutiny. Gold from West Africa circulated internationally. Ivory, textiles, and agricultural goods moved across deserts and seas. Religious scholarship linked West Africa to North Africa and the broader Islamic world. Coastal trade connected East Africa to India and China. Complexity was present. Integration was present. Agency was present. When you recognize that, the mental map shifts. Africa becomes not a passive backdrop to global history, but an active participant shaping economic currents, spiritual movements, and technological adaptation. History is rarely erased completely. It is compressed, simplified, reframed, but compression cannot permanently conceal structure.
ruins endure,
Archives survive. Oral traditions persist. The deeper you examine ancient Africa, the more you encounter systems rather than fragments, governance rather than chaos, trade rather than isolation, scholarship rather than silence. And once you see systems, you cannot return to caricature. The narrative expands. Proportion returns. Africa was not waiting for history to begin. It was already writing it.